Here we are, Real Recovery Talk. I am your host, Tom Conrad. In today's episode, we've got Benjamin B.
What's happening, everybody? What's up, Tom? You're back.
I'm back.
From where?
Florida Keys.
How was it?
It was good. Yeah, it was good. Had fun.
Did you bring some fish back?
I did. I brought a little bit back. Not a whole lot. We caught 16 total in 3 days. It was fun, though.
Was it pretty consistent, or was there like one
No,
good
we
day?
it was all consistent. We caught 7 the first day, 4 the second day, and 5 the third day. Yep.
Nice.
It was good. Went to Cujo Key. So it's mile marker 23. It's about 23 miles north of Key West.
Cool.
Went 20 miles out on the boat. It was beautiful.
Was there a breeze?
No.
It gets so hot.
It was so hot, but man, the ocean, it was, I'm telling you, 20 miles out in the ocean, and it was like an ice skating rink.
Really?
No, I mean, like the smallest of ripples. So, which is good because I can get seasick. So that was nice. I didn't have to contend with any of that. But yeah, on the way back, I had the boat going, 40 mile an hour, and it was like nothing, just gliding.
That's nice.
Yeah, it was fun.
Remember when we went what was that, 3 years ago?
Yeah, probably. No, 4.
It was a rough ride in and out a couple times.
Oh, yeah. It gets brutal. So, but yeah, had fun. Had a good time. Smoked a lot of cigars, so my voice is a little raspy. But hey, we're going to get through it. But listen, first things first, thank you for tuning in on the podcast app, whichever one it is that you choose to use. And thank you for watching on YouTube. Ben, we're coming up on 2,000 subscribers on YouTube.
I saw that.
Well, we're at 1,900.
We're coming up on our 300th episode, too.
Yeah, that's coming soon.
What number is this?
I'm not sure. 290.
This could be 300 for all we know.
No, I think this is 295 or 296. Something like that.
Do we have something special planned?
No,
No?
maybe we should, though.
Yeah, maybe we should.
Yeah, so if you haven't already, please go to YouTube and subscribe and try and watch some of the podcasts on YouTube if you're at home and you're washing dishes or, cooking chicken cacciatore for your family. It'd be cool if you can, just have us playing in the background, and it's good for my ego. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
Because I like seeing the numbers on YouTube go up. And I know it's a shameless plug, but it is what it is. So today what we're going to discuss is, and we're finally here, the 12th step of Alcoholics Anonymous to kind of wrap up our step study. We went through steps 1 through today, which is step 12. And man, I learned a lot because it is well known, at least amongst here and Rock and, our little community that we have here, that Ben is by far the most educated when it comes to 12-step stuff. And so I tell you what, I learned a lot from it, and I know the listeners have too. So let's just get right into it. Step 12. Ben, go ahead, read it off, and let's get to the nuts and bolts, if you will.
Before I do, I want to quickly say something. Man, I was really excited to do this step. And today, I'll be honest, I'm kind of down about it, man. My buddy Kevin passed away. And I wouldn't bring it up on here, but it's basically public knowledge. His brother also posted it on Facebook talking about it a little bit, but complications of alcoholism. And he's a guy, we grew up just down the street from each other. He was, 8, 9 years older than me maybe. Brought me to buy my first guitar when I was 10, 11 years old. But I used to watch his bands in his parents' garage. And, dude, they were really good. He was a bass player. He played for a few of the bands are Blindside, What's Her Face, Dharmata was another local band, One. But he actually was on tour with Seven Dust, Mudvayne.
Oh,
so
wow.
I really looked up to this dude. But did my best at a couple points to try and help him out, man, and just
couldn't do it.
Yeah. It's so you know, and I bring that up because one of the first things about the 12-step and just recovery in general, we're not in the results business. We're in the business of showing up. And, you know, it's hard not to reflect back when you lose somebody like, man, did I do everything that I could? And I can measurably look back and say, I wish I did more. But at the same time, I could confidently look at the times that I did try to help. And I definitely invested my time and heart into it. And, man, the shoulda, woulda, coulda attitude, the morbid reflection kicks in. You're like, could I have done anything different? But
Yeah.
But I did everything I could, man. I mean, I can't say that I didn't put effort. That's for darn sure.
Well, and anybody that knows you knows that that's like your thing, you know? If anybody puts in the effort, you do.
Yeah, so
You know?
but it is it goes back to show, man, we're powerless over alcoholism, whether it's and drug addiction, whether it's my own, once I start I don't stop, or somebody else's, man. The reality of the situation is we don't have the power to get other people sober. We can inspire them, give them all the tools, show them the tools. Whether they apply it or not is up to them.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
We show up, we work hard at helping others, and the result's not up to us.
Yeah.
But step 12 says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Wow.
Yeah, I mean
Best-
that's the
Best kept secret in AA?
that's the best kept secret in AA.
So let me touch on this real quick. Basically, I want to mention that when it comes to the 12-step, opinions are going to kind of run to extremes on this one. I have my experience with it. I'm going to share my experience. There's going to be a couple things that I'll bring up. Tom and I will definitely be going back and forth a little bit. I don't know, in agreement and disagreement, maybe somewhere in the neutral on it. I don't know, but because the 12-step in itself is based off of practical experience and finding what works, so to speak. Yes, you follow the program to a T. As far as I'm concerned, with the big book, you don't deviate from the big book. But the way that you present things, the way that you interact with people, you know, everyone's going to have their own style. So we'll get a little bit into that. But here's the cool thing about step 12 that was pointed out to me right away. That having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. You ever hear somebody in the rooms, Tom, say, just hang on for the miracle to happen?
Don't quit before the miracle happens.
Don't quit before the miracle happens. Yeah. In my opinion, if you have gone even 24 hours without taking a drink or a drug, hasn't the miracle technically already happened?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose so. I think most people can't go that long without using. So
not real drug addicts and alcoholics. And one thing that was pointed out to me by my sponsor is that if you're as alcoholic and addict as I am, if you've made it an entire day without using, the miracle already occurred. Somehow you stopped. Even if it's for 24 hours, what happens is the step work wakes you up to the miracle that already occurred.
Mm.
So it's becoming having this awareness that great things are already happening. Here I'm waiting for God to intervene, and the irony is God already intervened. It might not be in the way that I look. Maybe my family did an intervention on me. Maybe the police put me in handcuffs. Maybe I got Baker acted and had to detox against my will. But the fact of the matter is, it might not look like I want it to look. But a lot of times, man, if I made it 24 hours, it's because some higher power, spirit of the universe, whatever you want to call it, has already intervened in the process.
Yeah, I think to dive into that phrase though, a little bit more, you know, when you hear "don't quit before the miracle happens," you know, that what you just said, I agree with, but I think that's a very that understanding comes with years of wisdom, obviously. And in the context of which I would say that to somebody, don't quit before the miracle happens. A lot of times people, when they go through a 12-step program, they don't really know what to expect. And So if I were to explain that to somebody, don't quit before the miracle happens, or in my opinion, there's no, hey, what constitutes a miracle? That's something that has to be determined on an individual level. I think it makes sense to say, and for somebody to receive that and to hear that, I wouldn't come away from that thinking, oh, I'm going to have some sort of white light experience, or, oh, I'm going to get blessed with X, Y, and Z, oh, so on and so forth. It's something that, because I'll tell you from my experience, the miracle was, well, I guess going back to what you said, I just wasn't using, and that in and of itself was a miracle for me. And I think that's the case for most people, but I don't want people to hear that and think that something is going to happen, like the burning bush or something along those lines. It's a very, open-ended saying. And, but so I guess, talking it through like that, what you say does make sense. And I do think that's the experience for most people.
So to kind of move on to the next part of it too. Yeah, I agree with everything you said. So part of my story is I didn't want anything to do with the God stuff when I first got sober. God, higher power, that wasn't for me. But I wanted to stop drinking and drugging. So I get to step 12, and I remember saying to my sponsor, because I had a good sponsor, the one that brought me through the big book line by line and broke it down, as I've discussed in the previous episodes on the steps. It got to the point where I get to step 12, and he's like, all right, Ben, time for you to go find a sponsee. And I just remember saying to him, like, I didn't feel confident. And I'll never forget what he says, pardon my French, but he said, Ben, don't worry, you can't fuck them up any worse than they already are.
Yeah.
And that goes back to, we're not in the results business, we're in the business of showing up. And I had made highlights in my book and wrote down little notes. And my only job was to sit down with the sponsee and go through the book with them, tie my experience into it, what happened to me in each step, what it looked like, where I struggled, etc. Telling my truth, my experience, which is, opinions can be formulated off that, but I tried to keep it to my experience again, and opinions kill alcoholics. If something was my opinion, I tried to let them know. But for myself, I'll throw it out there right now that step 12 is where I really, really started to buy into the God thing. I remember sitting down with my first sponsee, and I read the doctor's opinion to him. And this dude stood up and gave me the biggest hug, and he was in tears, and he's like, no one's ever done that for me before. And in that moment, I felt this sense of purpose, and I was like, wow. Here, in my head, I was super insecure, not confident. I'm like, oh my God, this is my first sponsee. They're probably going to die because I'm their sponsor. And at the end of it, the guy was so grateful, and he didn't know the difference. He didn't know I was scared to be helping him. But by the end of meeting that first time, when he gave me that hug, I was like, I felt a sense of purpose, a drive. And I was like, it just clicked. I was like, I get it now. Like, and I found, honestly, it opened my eyes to the fact that God was in my heart right in that moment. If that makes sense.
Well, and I think that's something that a lot of people end up, missing or bypassing when they do decide to get sober. A lot of times people quit or relapse or whatever the case is, and they don't even get the opportunity to help somebody else. And I mean, if you talk to anybody that has been in a 12-step fellowship for any length of time, that have gone through the 12 steps and that are now to the point of taking other people through the 12 steps, it's a very known thing that it's more, it's even though it's us giving to somebody else through taking them through the 12 steps and whatnot, but it's also very selfish in the sense is that it helps us stay sober, and that I think is too, for the listeners, is something that if you don't understand that, that's the primary premise of it, and even if let's do a little history lesson in terms of early AA, with Bill and Dr. Bob and stuff like that, they found that it was easier for them to stay sober by helping other people get sober. Take us through just the little, like, how this even developed. And I know we covered this in another podcast.
Yeah, I think it's good to go over it again, though. So there would be basically two stories that I want to touch on to kind of summarize it. First and foremost, it's referred to as an altruistic program, doing for others without expecting anything in return. One of the little stories that I tell our clients all the time is and this one, Dr. Bob and Bill had gotten sober. They showed up to the hospital, and there was a gentleman there who had been committed for alcoholic insanity. And they show up to the hospital. They get the opportunity to talk to wife in the lobby. And they're like, here, they told the wife, we found the cure for alcoholism. We'd like to speak with your husband. And the wife said to Dr. Bob and Bill, well, we've tried everything. The doctors have tried everything. I don't think you can do anything for my husband. There's no way you're going to be able to cure him. And they said, oh, no. We're not going to cure him. He's going to cure us. So in other words, like going there, they were the ones getting their medicine by going and doing this 12-step call. Another important aspect to look at too, which gets breezed over a lot. I don't want to get too crazy on this one because we could talk about it for a long time with opinions again. And people are entitled to their opinions and their experiences on this for sure. But I like to point out Ebby Thatcher, who originally took Bill W. through the 6 tenets of the Oxford group before the 12 steps actually existed. Ebby Thatcher basically did a 12-step call and went to carry the message to his buddy Bill W. Ebby Thatcher only had 60 days of sobriety. Now, it gets argued all the time, like, oh, you need X amount of time to sponsor people, this, that, the other. I'm from the camp. If you've thoroughly, keyword thoroughly, gone through your steps and worked them, you are then qualified to take the next person through them. You're not there to be their therapist, this, that, the other. You are there to simply show them your experience with the steps that you took. Like baking a cake, like having a cake recipe. That's it. That kind of sum up what you were looking for as far as the history?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's puts it well. I mean, in the most simplest terms, it's easier for us to stay sober by helping others get sober and stay sober. And, we see this too, and I know I reference this a lot, but even in the fitness industry or, anything of the sorts, it doesn't even have to be drugs and alcohol. It could be shopping. It could be gambling. It can be food. A lot of times people find that if by me helping somebody else, in turn helps me, because none of us want to be hypocritical. And a lot of times people, I'm not going to tell somebody to do something that I'm not already doing myself. And if I do tell somebody to do something and I have that sense of conviction, like how can I get away telling you, hey, maybe you shouldn't do this, maybe you shouldn't do that, but meanwhile behind the scenes I'm doing it myself. Mm-hmm. There's a sense of like uneasiness with that. And that happens. It does happen sometimes. It even happens with me. Like, and let's just use this example. I'll go downstairs right now, and we have right now at any given time 20 to 25 people that are in their first 30 to 60 days of sobriety. I would go down there and tell them, hey, you need to hit as many meetings as you possibly can any given week. You need to work the steps, and you need to eventually get a sponsee and take them through the steps. On a certain degree, it's a little bit hypocritical of me because right now I don't have any sponsees, and I know we covered this, I think, in the last episode or a couple back, but I have had sponsees in the past, and I am, obviously doing, we're doing rock and the podcast and stuff like that. But there is a level of conviction there. How can I get away with telling somebody you need to do X, Y, and Z? Meanwhile, here I am, and I'm not.
Yep. Yeah, that had a lot to do with my journey as well. When you go from being the student to having to be the teacher, something happens internally. It rearranges us internally. If you look at, say, for instance, we always reference weight training, for instance. But like if I learn a little something from somebody, then I go show my buddy there's something about being the teacher that just it I don't know, man. It locks in the knowledge.
Well, and you also, though, I mean, in conjunction with that, being a teacher also means constantly remaining a student.
Mm-hmm.
You know, being open and susceptible to new ideas and different ways of going about things. Because even us here, we're obviously big 12-step people, but we don't subscribe to the idea that this is the only way to get sober.
Yeah, definitely.
There's multiple ways to get sober. And, I think being open to all that stuff is very important, which kind of ties into the 12 steps, in a way.
Yeah, it has to be. You have to let people find their own path. There is no monopoly on recovery. I like to let people know that, hey, man, if 12 steps aren't for you, I ain't here to force it down your throat.
Right.
So to kind of go on to the next point, in the Big Book, Chapter 7, Working with Others, which is all about the 12-step, it's an entire chapter dedicated to it. It says practical experience in really big, black, bold letters, all capital. Now, practical experience, I believe my interpretation is it starts off the chapter like that with the bold, capital letters, because it's you got to get experience through practice in doing this. Over the course of time, my style of sponsorship has evolved, so to speak. And I think that's why opinions run to extremes on how sponsorship should be, etc. But I think as we go through this, we'll kind of bring up some of those points. Let's talk about this. So this is the only interview where you have to convince somebody that you're a drug addict or alcoholic. Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
Where that's how I earn somebody's trust. Generally speaking, alcoholics and drug addicts want to know that you've been in their shoes and through what they've been through. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that to be helpful, you have to be in recovery yourself. You can educate yourself. You can have the knowledge. However, I'll just throw it out there. It is the opinion of the Big Book that alcoholics and drug addicts they're in a unique position to help others because we've experienced it. So let's talk about this. What do you think about this, Tom? I wrote a little note in here that my sponsor said to me. Don't talk God to an alcoholic. Talk alcoholic to an alcoholic.
Yeah, I agree.
We have to speak the same language. We can't, from some spiritual hilltop or position of superiority, tell people what to do. How often do alcoholics and drug addicts listen when somebody's barking orders at them?
Never.
Another thing I want to touch on, we talk about religion, and we've touched on this in past podcasts as well. Sometimes for me, I'm not a church guy, for instance. I do believe in God, I do believe in a higher power, etc. But there's a part in the book here that says, maybe I'm coming across somebody who has more knowledge of religion than I do, and they're strong in their faith. It says here, let him see you are not there to instruct him in religion. Admit that he probably knows more about it than you do, but call his attention to the fact that however deep his faith and knowledge, he could not have applied it or he would not have drank. A lot of times in my experience, I've come across guys that clearly know more about the Bible than I do, for instance. And I'm using the Bible as my example. I don't know anything about the Quran or much about Buddha at all. None of that. But it's not a sponsor's job to push their beliefs on somebody else, nor to criticize somebody else's beliefs. The idea behind the steps is to take what they have and turn it into something that works for them, and letting them do that on their own, have their own open interpretation. And Bill W's talked about this in his Grapevine articles and letters, where he talks about allowing people to have their own interpretation of the Big Book, and not to be, lack of a better way to put it, Big Book Nazis, so to speak. If you disagree with my interpretation of the Big Book and see it some other way, that's okay.
Right.
Anytime a sponsor like barks, no, it's this way, in my opinion, they're doing a disservice.
Well, it boils down to fanatical AA, just the same as fanatical Christianity. I mean, I had experiences with that in both realms. I've had experiences with an AA group that was Christian based, but it was a little over the top, and I'm a Christian, and I've discussed this in past podcasts. It wasn't something that resonated with me well, because the message that they were putting out was, hey, listen, you know, there's only one way to do this, and this is through the blood of Jesus Christ. Now, that you say that to a Christian, it's understood. I get it, you know, but have somebody walk into that meeting and that's the message that they hear. They're gonna turn around and they're gonna walk out, and there's a good chance that they're not gonna go back. They're definitely not going back to that meeting, and there's a high likelihood they're not gonna go to any more meetings. So, you know, I couldn't agree more. The whole idea behind, you know, the 12-step program and stuff like that, a lot of it is based off of interpretation, opinion, and what makes sense for you. And I've seen, you know, so that's the Christianity aspect of it, but I've also seen people inside the rooms of meetings that say, you know, no, this is what it means in the book. And if you don't think that that's what it means, well, I hate to tell you, but you're wrong. That's not right either. You know, it's one of these things that, like, if it makes sense to you and you feel like you're heading in the right direction, roll with that. I remember one time, and I don't know if you remember this or not, there's an individual that I know, and I still talk to this person somewhat often. He has something to say about everything when it comes to the big book. You know, doesn't matter what it is. He's a very intellectual person, can probably rehearse the majority of the big book. And I can't remember what he said, but he made a statement at some point in time, and this goes back probably 4 or 5 years. And I remember I got home and I called you, and I'm like, he said this, but I don't think that this is right. And I wish I could remember what he said, but what you said was really, you know, made sense. And it had something to do with a sponsor-sponsee relationship. And you said, the job of a sponsor is to take their hand and put it in the hand of God's. And if they choose to do that, great. If they choose not to, well, that's it's going to happen. And that made sense to me, because you can only do so much as a sponsor. Mm-hmm. You can only, you know, and there's a saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink it, you know? And that was because I believe this individual was he was saying something crazy about, I mean, I have to be led to believe that it had something to do with spirituality or something. But anyways, you said that and it made sense. And
Put your sponsee's hand in the hand of God's and leave it there.
Yeah.
Get out of the way.
Right.
In other words. Yeah, so I want to talk about this too. This is interesting. This is where, like, what we can kind of have some dialogue back and forth. So I'm part of this Facebook group that really looks at the big book, and it's supposed to be like a discussion and a pretty deep discussion on the readings. And there's a lot of controversy, so to speak. People kind of rebut each other, and sometimes I think it gets a little out of hand. But then the administrator comes on and will remind people, like, that's the purpose of that group, to, like, hear these different opinions and experiences of what's in the big book. But people start to go at each other sometimes. Somebody posted in this group, though, the other day, this was like 3 or 4 days ago, what happened to all the tough, no-nonsense, no BS sponsors? And you see people chiming in like, I'm like, tough, no nonsense, BS, no BS. And I wanted to comment so bad. Where'd they all go? Oh, they all drank over ego, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I want to touch on the fact too, like, I get the idea that you definitely need a sponsor that can tell you the truth, but at the same time, they're not there to be dictators. I've seen, and you brought up sponsorship families earlier, and we've known each other long enough to, I personally know like which sponsorship families, and they're all a little bit, we call them sponsorship families. It just, they kind of develop into their own, but, and they can each have their own style, and whatever works for you. But I've been part of sponsorship families where the sponsor like tries to direct people's lives, tell you who you can date. You're supposed to call them and let them know whether or not you're having pepperoni on your pizza for the night or if it's going to be cheese, like, and let them make the decision. Like, it just has gotten so out of hand, in my opinion. Like, a sponsor is not there to dictate your life. And I've seen, for instance, a good example. A guy that I ended up sponsoring later left a sponsor previously because he said, well, if you continue to date this girl, I'm not going to sponsor you anymore. But if you look in the big book, specifically to the program section, step 4, it says we're not to be the arbiter of anybody's sex conduct. Like, who you date, all that stuff is none of my business. Who am I to be like, oh, you're going to continue dating that girl, I'm not going to sponsor you anymore? Like, it literally contradicts what the big book says. And I think that's where I like to come back to. We're there to inspire people, not be tough and no BS. Like I get it. Again, you got to be straight up with people, sometimes tell them what they need to hear, even when they don't want to hear it. However, this idea that sponsors got to be like this up on this pedestal dictator to call people on their BS, it just doesn't sit with me. And the big book says here, this is when you first meet a sponsee for a prospect. If your talk has been sane, quiet, and full of human understanding, you have perhaps made a friend. It doesn't say made a sponsee, made a friend.
Yeah.
Because we're equals, man. We're both alcoholics. I might have 12 years, and you might have 12 minutes, but we're both alcoholics. There's no pecking order, so to speak. I'm just as likely to drink today as you are.
Yeah.
Unless I'm working a program.
Well, and this goes back to what you were saying earlier. And this is you were saying about having dialogue. This is what I refer to, and you were talking about it earlier about you believe if somebody worked the steps thoroughly and how Ebby Thatcher, had 60 days of sobriety and stuff like that. I think in 1935, 1940, that made sense, and they were able to, AA obviously wasn't near as big as what it is now, but they were able to take somebody through the 12 steps, and that is it. They weren't their financial advisors. They weren't their marriage counselors. They weren't their, relationship counselors, stuff like that. They weren't there to say, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. Sponsorship over the years has developed into something more. And that is where, you and I, and we've talked about this before, kind of disagree in terms of if a sponsor has the wherewithal and the abilities to just keep it within the 12 steps, then sure. But you have to be able to, when your sponsee calls you and you have 90 days of sobriety and your sponsor or your sponsee calls you with some sort of question that is outside the scope of the 12 steps, you need to be able to put your ego aside and set aside your pride and everything, because you're going to want to tell them what to do. You're going to want to help them in some sort of capacity, and you're going to want to sound like you know what you're talking about. But you have to be able to say, you know what? Hey, this falls out of the scope of what my primary purpose is, taking you through the 12 steps. And unfortunately, I don't think that a lot of people are capable of doing that. I don't. And if you are, then sure, I don't care how much sobriety time you have. If you've thoroughly worked the steps and you've gone through that process and you want to get a sponsee and do that, then by all means go for it. But you have to be able to do those sorts of things. And I think that that's very important because, I see a ton of people that their egos are so big and they will just flap at the jaws just for the sense of hearing themselves talk. And having these big egos and all this pride and stuff, it really does a disservice because too, if a sponsee manages to get somebody like you, not you, I'm saying this egotistical maniac as a sponsor, the tone is set that this is how this is done. Mm-hmm. And now they're getting a sponsee and they're going to be the same way. And I know of a sponsorship family, and I know you know the same exact one, that if you look at the lineage of the sponsorship family, it is all based off of the totem pole, basically.
Definitely.
Where do you fall on the totem pole? You're down here. We're up here. And that's not what this process is supposed to be about. Like you said, I'm no different than the person that's got 12 minutes of sobriety. What I do have is wisdom. I have clarity around what this process is supposed to look like. There's a good chance that I've experienced a lot of what you have gone through, and I can help you with that. And I'm going to keep it within the confines of AA. You could call me on marriage stuff but I'm always going to divert you to, if you're having marriage problems, I'm going to tell you to get a marriage counselor. I'll tell you what I can tell you based off my own experience. But if you call me and say that your parent died, I'm not going to be able to tell you how to handle that because I haven't gone through that yet. And I'm going to, but that comes with time. That comes with wisdom. That comes with, understanding that, hey, I'm not all that in a bag of chips.
Yeah, one of my something that I've been doing this year, in fact, I came, and I've always done this, but I'm really well tied into the fellowship, and the big book says we may well have a remedy for thousands of such situations where I know somebody in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous at this point who has been through just about everything. Like, if you're going through a divorce, I know someone that's been through a divorce. You got some genetic disease, I know somebody with, you know what I'm saying? So, a couple times in the last year, I've specifically had some sponsees come to me with problems like with grief and loss, for instance. And, in fact, one of the guys, I directed him to Eric, who we've had on the podcast, one of the guys we work with here. Eric lost his wife to a rare lung disease. And I know a guy that lost his wife recently, and I say, hey, man, why don't you, I linked him and Eric up, and they went and had coffee together because it was something that I haven't experienced.
Right.
Right. And the value that comes from being able to say, like you were saying, hey, I don't have experience with this, and I don't want to just like talk to hear myself. If I don't know, I don't know. And a sponsor being able to say, I don't know, is a really good quality in a sponsor.
Yeah, it definitely is. And not even in a sponsor, and just in any sort of facet of life. And that's one of the, sales 101. When you get hit with a question that you don't know the answer to, do not try and make the answer up just to sound like you know what you're talking about, because people can see through that. The unfortunate thing is with this, we're dealing with people that genuinely need help, and it's important. It's important to be able to set your ego aside, put down the pride and, come at it from a point of view of, hey, I genuinely want to help you, but being able to say, I don't know. Let me find somebody that does.
So let's go a different direction with this sponsorship thing. My big book on page 96 says, search out another alcoholic and try again. And it's referring to if you have a sponsee that goes back out, or maybe it's somebody you met and they don't end up not meeting you at the meeting or whatever the case is. According to the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's the sponsor's job to find the sponsee, not the other way around. Now, over the course of time, and you got to understand the history of this, Alcoholics Anonymous was small, 1930s, 1940s, when it started. Sponsors had to go out and find sponsees, and that's the way that I think it should be, personally. However, what's happened, especially here, for instance, in Palm Beach County, where the recovery culture is huge, we got so many people coming down here that for treatment and stuff, I mean, they're just flying down here in droves. There's so many treatment centers. They end up at these AA, NA clubhouses, and all of a sudden there's more people that need sponsors than there are sponsors. And that's always going to be the case in this area as long as it's a treatment hub. So I understand how, culturally speaking, and through, I guess you would call it just the population of both, how it's turned into sponsees having to ask sponsors to sponsor them. But just kind of want to throw it out there. It is a sponsor's job to find a sponsee. If I'm without a sponsee, I need to go find one.
Right.
For me. That's my responsibility. Now, kind of touch on this too, to tie it in, and I want to hear what you have to say about this. I was taught alcohol is the great persuader, not the sponsor. So I hear a lot of times sponsors want to test people's willingness. Mm. Who made you God to test their willingness, right? Like, and the way that some sponsors will do this is they'll say, "Call me for the next 30 days before I give you my time and meet up with you. I don't want to waste my time with you. I want to make sure you're serious."
Yeah.
What? I know how to use my cell phone. I called my drug dealer 30 times a day. In my opinion, either people were taught wrong and they're not following the big book, or they don't actually want to meet up and do the work with somebody, because let's call it what it is. If you don't start working towards a solution right away with the sponsee, what are the chances that they're going to drink a drug within the first 30 days? Pretty good. And guess what? If they don't call you 30 days in a row, you could go around telling everybody, "Yeah, man, I got a sponsee. He's calling me for the next 30 days. And then on day 23, he stops calling. You're like, "Oh, not meeting up with you. Missed a couple days. We'll start our 30 days over." And they don't actually have to put any effort into sponsoring somebody, but they can stand up on their pedestal and be like, "I got sponsees."
Yeah. I think I do honestly think that it's more of what people are taught more than if they really want to help somebody or not.
I'll agree with that.
Yeah, because you see that so much down here, even in the meetings, at the end of the meeting, or sometimes in the beginning. There's oftentimes, the leader will say, "For those of you willing to sponsor, please raise your hand." And you see a bunch of people raise their hand, which is great. I don't have any issues with that. But then they say, if you are in need of a sponsor, get with one of these people after the meeting. I would flip that and say, "Hey, if I'm the leader of the meeting, which one of you in this group of 50 men that are in here, which one of you are without sponsors? And if you're willing to do so, would you please raise your hand, or please stand up? Would the real sponsorless person please stand up?"
Yep. I 110% agree with you.
Yeah.
And I do attend some meetings that do that.
And that's the way that it should be done. And that way, when I'm sitting there and I see all these people stand up, all I got to do is pick one and go walk up to that person and say, "Hey, let me sponsor you. I've been through this process."
Yep.
And that calling every day for 30 days is a bunch of crap. Like, it's not something where, I don't know. I disagree. I think that it just feeds into somebody's ego. It's something that was taught to them, because their sponsor told them, "Hey, you're going to call me every day for 30 days and then we'll get into some work." And like, that's That's stupid. And my sponsor did that with me, and I didn't know any better at the time. You know, I thought, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to call you every day for 30 days. And I'd call him and say, hey, I'm calling you. Okay, cool. Hey, man, how you know? And there was no real substance around the conversations. You just told me to call you.
Exactly.
You know, I'm taking a dump. How you doing?
So my sponsor told me to do page 86 of the big book, which is the prayer, but it's really an inventory. And so when I did talk to him, I had to send that to him every day, but there was substance to our discussion. We also met up right away and jumped right into the big book. He didn't waste any time doing that. And
my sponsor did the same too. I don't think he listens to this, but in the event that he does, we also did. We got together. We went out, and like what you said, you could develop a friend. That's what we did. We honestly, we became really good friends to the point he was in my wedding, stuff like that. So, you know, he was a great sponsor because he allowed me to come up. He allowed me to make decisions on my own, and he would kind of guide my decisions. And he always spoke from his experience. This is what I did. This is what worked for me. If you want to go this route, go ahead, you know, those sorts of things. And he would, you know, I'm living in a halfway house, you know, he'd pick me up. He'd treat me to dinner, stuff like that. Like, it was a really cool, if I were to take a sponsor-sponsee relationship and package it up and sell it, this is what I think I would want it to look like, because it was a very give and take type relationship. And I think that's what this is all about. And unfortunately, people get it twisted and make it something that it's not.
And you got to inspire people. Going back to the tough sponsor, you better make it to me. You'd find a way to get your drugs. So I know you don't have a vehicle, and I know it's pouring rain.
Yeah.
And I live 15 miles away. You'll figure it out. You'll get to my house. I'm like,
up.
bro.
Yeah.
And I tell my sponsees this up front. I said, I'm going to, at first, I'll come to you. If that's what you, like, if you have a vehicle and stuff, like, yeah, come to me. But if you're someone that doesn't have a vehicle, doesn't have a driver's license, stuff like that, like, I'll be like, hey, man, I'll come to you. But I want to let you know, I want you to remember this, because I want you to do this for your first prospect.
Right. Well, and I think too, in response to somebody that does go along with that approach, oh, you would drive 15 miles to get your drugs. You're damn right. Or you would walk 15 miles uphill both ways in a blizzard to get your drugs. Yes, I would. Because you know what those drugs were doing for me? They were allowing me to escape. They were allowing me to get high. They were allowing me to completely disconnect from the world. Now, what you're asking me to do is walk uphill both ways in a blizzard so I can come meet with you, be raw, be emotional, be, you know, the most vulnerable person that I have ever been over the past X amount of years. There's nothing about this that is enjoyable. I know this is going to suck. So you can't expect somebody to just, hey, I'm going to strap on my shoes and go meet with my sponsor because, you know, oh, like that's a fairy tale land. When people decide to get sober, they're beat down, they're broken. They don't like the idea of giving up drugs and alcohol, but they have to because they're going to die. You know, and I think sponsors need to do a better job of understanding that, hey, and we even do this with our clients. And I tell every single client that walks in here, when you enter into these doors, it's not so much, oh, you need to be ready to do the deal. You know, you need to be ready to be vulnerable with your therapist. You need to participate in group. You need to do this. You need to do that. We don't operate that way. I tell everybody, we're willing to put in a little bit more effort than you.
Yeah. Well, sponsors always use they'll ask someone in the beginning, because it says this in the big book, we were willing to go to any lengths.
Yeah.
So, but that's any lengths in context to the big book, not any lengths of you're going to walk 100 miles to get to me David Goggins style.
Right.
Like, so people take, again, that's where like knowing this big book front to back and the actual program and what it actually says, what's it saying, what's it not saying, because you can take these words and twist it.
Yeah.
Oh, you willing to go to any lengths, Tom?
Right.
Why don't you go stand out in the rain for the next 8 hours?
Yeah, go get my laundry.
Yeah,
And
like
fold it. Put it away for me.
Yeah, so people take, and I've seen people take that out of context.
Yeah. We got to wrap it up soon, so let's, what do you got?
So, as far as, I've had sponsees that, sometimes most of the time I get someone brand new. I've also been sober long enough where, I'll have somebody with like 5 years sober come to me and ask me to take them through the big book so they can have a new experience with it. And I want to just throw this part out there. The reason I bring that up is a lot of times when that happens, they're not doing too well spiritually, mentally, whatever the case is. One of the first questions I ask them, because they've been through their steps, they're 5 years sober, how many sponsees do you have?
Right.
And I hear the same response all the time. It's about this. Most of the time. Well, I have 3. Oh, tell me about them. What's going on with them? Well, I have this guy, but I haven't heard from him in 3 months. And I got this guy, I met with them 3 weeks ago one time. Got that, like...
And then you got one that's got a couple years of sobriety that's been through the steps and...
Yeah, and so that's
doesn't
where I was...
require any work.
Exactly, that's where I was going with that. We talked about this with Steve on the last episode. In my opinion, when somebody asks me how many people I'm sponsoring, I only count the ones that I'm actively doing step work with. Which brings me to my next... I wanted to hear your opinion on this. I currently don't have a sponsor, and I haven't for years. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times I'll hear in meetings, I have a sponsor who has a sponsor who has a sponsor. And like, I get that. That's not a bad thing. I'm not knocking that whatsoever. But I'm also, and I used to be self-conscious about that, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. Oh man, I don't have a sponsor. And, the whole thing is I'm starting to meet more and more people that I look up to in recovery, and I'm finding out they don't have active sponsors. So once you've been through the steps, I can only speak to my experience with my sponsees. I bring them through the steps. We either become friends or we don't at that point, like through our experience together. And it's hard to say what will be, what won't. I get them through their steps. You could call me your sponsor for the rest of your life if you want. I still say my sponsor that brought me through the steps, but what do I need a sponsor for if I've actively been through the steps already, I'm taking other guys through, and I'm at a place, Tom, where if I did need suggestions, I have so many people like you, like Eric, like John, like Bob, like I could just rattle off 150 people off the top of my head that I can go to like I would a sponsor.
Right. I think it boils down to it's splitting hairs. I don't think that, again, I think it's a part of maybe a little bit of an ego thing to be able to say I have, a sponsor who has a sponsor who has a sponsor. Like, congratulations, I suppose, that's great, and your sponsor is directly tied in the lineage somehow to Bill W. Yeah. Cool. That's great. Here's your medal. I guess we all are. But I'm with you. I mean, I don't have a sponsor per se. I have a group of men that I know I could reach out to at any given time and get the feedback that I need. And I think that is what is most important. And again, I reference other areas in life that is the same. You look at somebody that goes through medical school. When you're going through medical school, and let's just say you're taking up, you're going to be a heart doctor. You're going to have somebody as you're going through medical school that is going to be, now they're not called a sponsor, but you have a heart doctor that has gone through this whole process that you've gone through, and it is their job to kind of show you the way and become a proper heart surgeon. Mm-hmm. But you're not lying in the winds of that person the whole entire way through your career. At some point in time, now you have people that you're teaching becoming a proper heart doctor, heart surgeon, so on and so forth. Doesn't mean that if you run into an issue, you can't call somebody that's been doing it longer than you, that has a different experience than you, that can offer a different perspective. Doesn't mean you can't reach out to that person. And oftentimes you should. It's a great thing. Seek wise counsel. We're always able to do those sorts of things. So I think it discredits people some, and I've known that about you for a long time, and I knew there was a period of time that you were self-conscious of that. And for me, I had one sponsor, and that was, he took me through the steps almost 13 years ago, and I can say that is the only sponsor that I've ever had, and I have no issue saying that. And some people would roll over in their grave by hearing that. But I have, like you said, I probably have 5 to 10 dudes that I know I can call right now if I have an issue. Well, my dad had a stroke. When my dad had a stroke, that was one of the biggest, most impactful experiences that I've gone through up to this point in my sobriety. And what did I do? I called you. I called my buddy Peter. I called a whole bunch of people to let them know, hey, this is what happened. I'm okay. It sucks, and had to navigate that, but I had everybody there with me. And honestly, I think it's a more powerful approach than having just one person, because if you have one person that you look towards, then it could be easy to just shut everybody else out, or not shut them out, but just not even draw acknowledgement to, hey, I have these other people too that I can call. So I don't know. That's my thoughts on it. But again, I don't think there's anything wrong
exactly
with having a sponsor who has a sponsor who has a sponsor. It's just not my experience.
Correct.
And I'm cool with that.
Yeah. And I've tried to attain a sponsor a few times. It's kind of funny. I asked this dude to sponsor me a few years ago, and he gave me the call me every day thing. And I did, and I did, and I did, and I did. And he just never wanted to meet up with me. And I finally said to him, I said, hey, man, I don't think this is what I'm looking for. I've called you every day, and you either want to sit down and have an experience, alcoholic to alcoholic, or you don't. And I just told him point blank, man, I respect you. I respect what you have to say in meetings. But I was taught sponsorship something different than this, and I'm no longer going to be pursuing this.
Right.
And there was 2 other times.
How did he receive that?
He said he understood.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah, it was good. And him and I, we still speak, and we're on good terms.
Yeah.
It was said with tact and class.
Right.
On both ends.
Yeah.
So, and then there was another time, dude, I asked someone to, actually, I'll just throw it out there. I think maybe I talked about it before, but prior to Eric working here, I was going to ask Eric to sponsor me. And we walked out of our meeting together.
And then he asked you to sponsor him?
Yeah, he asked me, and I was like, dude, I was just about to ask you. So we on a handshake. And then I had the same thing happen with another guy that I know, JD. And he just looked at me. He's like, dude, you should be sponsoring me. I'm like, well, I wouldn't have asked you if I thought that. And
right.
Another handshake. But right there, I've got those guys that, while they're not my quote-unquote sponsor, we have an agreement with each other that we can talk to each other about everything. So is that kind of like a sponsor? And Bill W., after Ebby Thatcher took him through the 6 tenets of the Oxford Group, which was his steps, Bill W. never had a sponsor after that.
Oh, well, see?
So just throwing that out there. And again, opinions are going to run to extremes. People have different experiences. There was only 2 quick things I wanted to touch on, Tom, before we wrap this up. There's a line in here that says, we find it a waste of time to keep chasing a man who cannot or will not work with you. How do you draw the line between chasing somebody and not chasing somebody? Just a tip that I would give out of my practical experience. Again, I'm one that believes in meeting somebody at least 50-50, maybe a little bit more on my end, maybe a 70-30 on my end. Mm-hmm. Like we talked about, me driving to them until they get the resources or whatever the case is. But I will call my sponsees, and some people are totally against this. They're like, it's a sponsor's job or the sponsee's job to call the sponsor. And I personally disagree with that because I want to show that I'm willing to do the same on my end and inspire them and make them feel welcome. But I will, if I've called somebody like 2 or 3 times, I haven't heard from them.
Yeah.
I'll give them one more call and just be like, hey man, I just want to let you know, dude, this is my courtesy call. Like, I've called you the last couple times. You know, I'm totally okay. If this is something you don't want to do, that's fine. I just like showing through example that I was willing to call you. But at this point, you're going to have to call me the next time.
Right.
But I've already shown them that I'm willing.
Yeah.
So.
No, I agree. I think that's the best. That's the best way to go about it.
Yeah.
I mean, really not much more. You call somebody more than a couple times, they don't want nothing to do with you, I suppose. It's like if you call a girl that you're trying to go out on, you don't call her more than twice. If you do, you're a weirdo.
I only said 2 things. Let me throw this in there real quick. This line says, it may mean the loss of many nights' sleep, great interference with your pleasures, interruptions to your business. Dude, if you're sponsoring people and it's not inconvenient for you, you're probably not doing it right. I'll just throw that out there.
Interesting.
I mean, how many times do I not want to go meet up with a sponsee? It's Sunday night.
Yeah.
It's the end of the weekend. I want to just sit down with the family, watch Netflix with Whitney, and I'm like, oh, I got to go meet this sponsee at their halfway house at 8 o'clock tonight. But afterwards, I feel good. But that's me having to put the effort in.
Right.
Right? It will inconvenience you.
Yeah.
But it's an altruistic program. You're doing for others without expecting anything in return. Lastly, Tom, here we go. Let's talk about meetings for a second. Meetings are for the newcomers to find the solution that we have. Right? I think meetings have turned into these, not all, don't get me wrong, but sometimes they turn into more like therapy sessions, group therapy.
Yep.
Men's support groups, stuff like that. And I think it's important to stick to the principles and the traditions and get them aligned with like what we're there to do, which is AA and the program of AA. In AA's case, and NA, do that for NA, CA, do that for CA. But the point in meetings is so that sponsors can find sponsees. Point blank period, if I had to sum it up. Now, I've shared this experience many podcasts ago, but I had a buddy who, in a way, like kind of talked down to me. He had several years of sobriety. At least I interpreted it as he talked down to me. He's like, oh, I only go to meetings with people, with old timers who have 25 plus years. There's no newcomers at the meeting. And I think I finally said to him, I said, so who are you there to help? There's no one at the meeting to help? Because if you look at traditions, our primary purpose is to help the alcoholic who still suffers. Sounds like none of the people in your meeting are suffering.
Well, that's, yeah.
No one needs your message.
Step.
And we've talked about this. You know, I used to go to what was referred to as the Dirty 30. I still do 8:30 meetings.
Yeah.
Because that's where the treatment vans go, the people that are there to, there's a little bit more riffraff, but those are the people that need to hear the message.
Right. No, I agree.
So, yeah, man. Sponsor's job, at least the way I understand it in AA, to sum it up in one short thing, sponsor's job is to take you through the big book line by line. Every time it says stop and do something, you stop and do it.
Yeah.
You share your experience. That's it.
Well, that, and, you know, in conjunction to the 12th step, that is basically when you're going to have the opportunity to do that, you know, and don't try and, I know we covered all the steps. We covered them in chronological order because they're in order for a reason, and it takes time, it takes effort, it takes work to finally get to the point of being able to take somebody through the 12 steps on your own. Do not rush the process. Do not try and make it out to something that it is not. Simply follow the program as it is outlined inside the book with a sponsor, and you will get to a position to where you're able to take other people through the steps. And a byproduct of that is it ensures that you will stay sober. Doesn't ensure it. Doesn't guarantee that you're going to stay sober, but boy, you will have a much better chance of maintaining long-term sobriety if you're helping other people stay sober. So, any final thoughts, Ben?
One thing I left out that I think it's important to touch on. If I have a sponsee who relapses,
Yeah.
say we get to step 4
Yeah.
and they relapse, this is just my personal take, we're going to pick up where we left off in the steps.
Okay.
A lot of people say start over.
Yeah.
I do agree with like reviewing it, but at least in AA, the way I understand, I'm not going to go back and read the entire book to you again.
Right.
Like, in my opinion, just as an example, and this is not black and white, but if somebody relapsed when they were on step 7, maybe it's the amends that they needed to make, 8 and 9. Or, get through all 12, because it's a 12-step program.
Sure.
It's not like do the first 3 steps and you're guaranteed sobriety. Do the first 5, you're guaranteed sobriety. I'm a believer, and this is my practical experience, pick up where you left off. Opinions will run to extremes on that one, but that is my take on it.
Yeah, I'm more aligned with you on that. So, all right. Well, hey, listen. Thank you for tuning in to Real Recovery Talk. And in the end, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, or if you want to dive into anything that we've spoken about over the past X amount of whatever, years, months, weeks, days, you could always reach us, Tom at realrecoverytalk.com and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com. And basically all we're going to do is ask you for your phone number, and we'll have a conversation with you about your specific situation and see if we can help you out in any possible way, shape, or form. So ultimately, what we are wanting to do, though, is help you turn your mess into your message. That is it. We will see y'all later.